Today, we are in the Jura area of the canton of Jura in Switzerland. The region is secluded of the rest of Switzerland by the Jura mountains, and geographically as well as culturally close to France. Here, the Chemins de fer du Jura operate a short branch line from Porrentruy to Bonfol. The 11-kilometer long line was born in 1901 as Régional Porrentruy Bonfol RBDe. Only 9 years later, the line became international as it was extended by 2 kilometers to the border to connect to the Denmark-Vetterhuis line. In 1944, RBDe was integrated in the newly founded Chemins de fer du Jura, CJ, together with other mostly narrow gauge loss-making railways. That's why CJ, known today for the scenic narrow gauge network, also operates this little-known normal gauge line. The CJ's international career didn't last long though. As trains across the border were mostly empty, cross-border traffic was shut down in 1946. In typical SNCF manner for branch lines, the tracks on the French side were dismantled in 1971, together with the rest of the Denmark-Vetterhuis line. The Swiss part, however, was electrified and modernized in the 1950s. Even on the Swiss side, the demand on the line remained low. Yet, it survived anyway but fell into some kind of hibernation with little to no modernization, saving an otherwise long-lost atmosphere until today. But this is about to change rapidly, and that's the reason why we're here today. One reason is the two special train sets that operate the line. They consist of a class RBDe 566-1 railcar and a matching driving trailer. Like most of the trains here in the last 120 years, they were bought second-hand, in this case from the BLS. They were built in 1973 and 74 for the EBT group, which today is part of the BLS, and taken over by CJ in 2013 and 2016. These trains are of historical importance for the development of rolling stock in Switzerland. As more or less the only ones, they represent the transition between the widespread 1960s stock and the NPZ series from the 80s on nearly all Swiss normal gauge railways. 8 rail cars, 9 driving trailers and 10 coaches were delivered to the 3 railways of EBT. Technically, they were still close to the 1960s stock. The construction is based on the EW1 coaches. From a conceptual point, however, they were revolutionary. They had rail cars with cab on one end only. They featured large swinging sliding doors. They had big entrance platforms. They provided acceleration characteristics tailored for dense suburban commuter traffic with many stops. And they had a new front design without a front door. It's interesting that these trains were never used on suburban traffic though. EBT operated rural lines, and when some of them have been integrated into the S-Bahn Bern, other stock was working this service. Yet, the new concept was very successful. The conception of the NPZ generation, with roughly 200 train sets built in the 1980s and 90s, was based on these EBT trains. They therefore paved the way for one of the most successful and widespread regional train generation in Switzerland. For most of their life, the trains stayed around the Emmental, working in local trains. In the 1990s, after the EBT group was rebranded as Regionalverkehr Mittelland, they were repainted in a beautiful, bold livery designed by famous designer Luigi Colani. The beautiful winged wheel livery was sadly rather short-lived. When the RM was integrated into the BLS in 2006, the large logo had to go, although the symbol was still part of the BLS identity. In a modified design, they were used until 2014, when BLS took them out of service. And now this brings us back to the Porrentruy-Bonfol line, as the CJ looked for an opportunity to replace one of their original RBDe 44 railcars. The BLS class seemed suitable, and so one train set was saved from scrapping and transferred to the Jura in 2013. In 2016, CJ's NPZ was due for an overhaul, and this was apparently too expensive, so they decided to rent another old RBDe 566 from the BLS and to scrap the newer NPZ, bought in 2009 only. One of the train sets here, sadly the one working today, has been covered in a comic-style illustration, which messes a little bit up the original design, but apart from that, these trains are really beautiful. Bonfol, 440 meters, 650 inhabitants. It is the terminus of the line, a once very typical branch line terminus with 2 tracks, a station building, a freight loading ramp, a 2-track depot and a goods shed. The second train set, with railcar 221, awaits the next working, which will probably never come. This train is set to leave for the scrapyard very soon. Behind the terminus, in fact, you can see that there is a track leaving the station northwards. It's the former international line towards France, which later served as a freight siding when an old hazardous waste landfill had to be excavated in the 2000s. It's worth exploring the first 200 meters of this approximately 2 km long track, as the drone showed an interesting train hidden here. It's the second one of the 2 NPZ formerly owned by the Transport Public Fribourgeois, bought to replace the current train sets. The class RBDe 567 train sets were built in 1991 and tastefully refurbished in the early 2000s. It was a smart buy from the CJ. It's known as a reliable rolling stock and they meet accessibility standards, one of the main drivers of the current modernizations of stations and the rolling stock. Until the end of 2023, in Switzerland, all public transportation must provide direct accessibility for people with disabilities. Speaking of which, to provide level boarding, the station of Bonfol has to be modernized as well. Works should start this year. So if you want to get the full branch line experience here, you should better hurry up to visit. If you enjoyed this mini documentary, like the video and consider subscribing so you don't miss the coming video of the journey itself.